My name is Specialist Rose Owen, 28, United States Army Artillery. At Fort Sill, the call came. My stepmother's voice like poison. I gave your trust fund to Tiffany. It's for her wedding, not your soldier games. The receiver slick with sweat, the hum of fluorescent lights. She thought she'd won. She had no idea a counteroffensive was already locked and loaded. What would you do if family tried to erase your legacy? Drop your thoughts below and subscribe. This story is for you. My name is Specialist Owen, 28 years old, an artilleryman stationed at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. My life here is measured in clear orders, firing tables, and the thump of the howitzer as it sends steel into the horizon. Out here, every detail matters. How you breathe, how you pace, how you stand in formation. It is a world of discipline. That's why the phone call I received that afternoon felt like an ambush. It came not from the battlefield, but from Charleston, and the voice on the other end was a familiar one. Elaine, my stepmother. Rose, she began in her syrup-sweet drawl. I thought you should know. The trust your late mother left behind won't go to waste after all. I've already arranged it for Sloane's wedding. It'll give her the start she deserves. You don't need it. Your soldier's paycheck is enough for your games. Her words dripped like acid over a wound that had never quite healed. She didn't stop there. If Elizabeth were alive, she'd be ashamed of you, throwing away a respectable life for a cheap uniform. Then she chuckled, a brittle, triumphant little laugh. And just like that, the call ended. No pause for response, no chance for me to speak. The line went dead, leaving only the hum of fluorescent lights above my bunk. For a moment, my pulse pounded in my ears like incoming artillery. Shock is the first phase, and shock can kill quicker than a wound. That's what they teach us. My training kicked in before emotion could swallow me. Box breathing. 4 seconds in. Hold 4, 4 out, hold 4. Again. The rhythm steadied the chaos until my heartbeat slowed. Procedure over panic. That was the creed drilled into me, and I lived it in that moment. I set the receiver down on my desk and opened my small green notebook. Every soldier keeps logs, range cards, maintenance notes, call for fire data. Mine also carried personal entries. I wrote the date, the time, and 3 words in capital letters. Elaine, call, trust. A receipt, evidence, not just memory. That's how you fight battles you can't afford to lose. Documentation, chain of custody, facts. The air conditioner rattled in the corner, but a different kind of heat spread through me. Not the Oklahoma sun, but the sting of her words. Ashamed of you. I refused to let rage take command. Rage burns hot and quick. Discipline fuels engines. I folded my ACU jacket on the desk with razor-sharp creases, pressing the fabric flat, sleeves aligned exactly at 90 degrees. Next, I lifted my boots from by the door, already gleaming from last night's polish. Still, I ran the brush in small circles over the leather, the scent of kiwi polish sharp in my nose. Each motion was deliberate, like loading a shell. Order reasserted in a world Elaine wanted to make chaotic. When the ritual was finished, I slid my footlocker from under the cot. Inside, beneath spare uniforms, lay a thin binder with a white label across its spine. Operation Night Heron. It wasn't new. I had begun it 6 months earlier when I first noticed probing questions from Charleston. Notes, receipts, fragments of correspondence. All cataloged and ordered. Elaine thought she was catching me unprepared. What she didn't know was that I had been running this as a long operation from the start. Shock was over. Procedure had taken hold. A battle had been declared, and I had my orders. Charleston wasn't a battlefield in the way people imagine war, but it had its own rules of occupation. When Elaine arrived, she didn't storm the gates. She smiled on the porch with a covered dish and a story about healing. She used the language of kindness the way some people use wire cutters. Quietly, efficiently, without leaving visible marks. The first change was the living room. Our family lighthouse photo. My mother in a red windbreaker, hair blown back, laughing as the St. Helena light cut the winter sky. disappeared from above the mantel. In its place, a tasteful marsh print in muted greens and tans. "More neutral," Elaine said, palm resting lightly on my arm, the touch a substitute for permission. My father nodded as though he'd thought of it first. I stared at the faint outline where the lighthouse's frame had left the wall brighter than the rest. That ghostly rectangle stayed for months, a negative of what had been. That's how it went. Curtains replaced. The china my mother loved was boxed and stored, though I never learned where. The piano, her piano, the one she bought used and tuned herself, went for a very fair price to a family Elaine knew from the club. "Sloan needs a better instrument for her portfolio," she said, as if talent grew out of lacquer and brand names. I found the moving invoice later, folded under a legal pad on my father's desk. The price stung less than the neat signature that said we'd agreed. There was a storm that summer, the kind that claws at the palms and turns the streets into rivers. My car stalled 3 blocks from home, water licking at the doors. I called my father and explained in a voice that tried not to shake. I heard his old strength load into the receiver. "I'm coming to get you." Then a hush, and behind it, Elaine's soft insistence. "Sloan is frightened of thunder. She needs you here. Rose is tough." I waited 2 long breaths. His voice returned. Lighter by 100 pounds. "You'll figure it out." The line clicked dead. I waded home, shoes ruined, jeans heavy, a salty film drying on my skin. When I stepped into the foyer, he looked at me the way you look at a delivery that arrived on time. Relieved, transactional. Later, I saved his text in my green notebook by copying it word for word. "You'll figure it out." A lesson, if I wanted one. Public nights multiplied the private erasures. At a charity gala with chilled shrimp and polite laughter, Elaine took the podium to toast donors. "And a special word for Rose," she said, head tilted just enough to broadcast benevolence. "Serving our country, learning such discipline." The pause was the insult. A handful of people clinked their glasses a beat too late. It wasn't a compliment. It was a pat on the head for a child who'd chosen a hobby. I learned to leave rooms before I said something I couldn't take back. I learned that home could be orderly and still be treacherous. I learned that my father liked the quiet that came when he agreed with whoever was speaking last. When the piano vanished, I didn't fight. I wrote the invoice number in my notebook and folded it into a page sleeve with other small subtractions. The lighthouse photo, the boxed china, a holiday menu rewritten without my mother's recipes. Documentation, receipts, not because I planned a trial then, but because I needed proof that I hadn't imagined losing what we'd had. The army didn't arrive as a rebellion. It arrived as relief. I walked into the recruiting office off a strip mall where the asphalt radiated heat and the posters promised structure. No one there asked me to be neutral. They asked me to be exact. They showed me where to sign and what would follow. Fort Sill became a place where records mattered, and breath had a pattern, and the word discipline meant the same thing to every person in the room. If home was drifting sand, the artillery tables were bedrock. In training, I found a language that held. I learned how to keep account under stress, how to move as a section, how to read the sky and the wind and the ground for what they'd do to a round in flight. I was not the strongest or the fastest. I was the one who could make numbers land where steel needed to land. On bulletin boards at the end of cycles, my name rose from the middle of the list to the top. When they handed me a certificate for accuracy, I didn't smile for cameras. I ran my thumb along the raised edge of the paper, felt the weight of it, and filed a photocopy into a sleeve the way a person stores clean water. Meanwhile, Charleston kept adjusting its furniture. I came home on leave once to find the dining chairs reupholstered in a fabric that matched the marsh painting and the words, "Our Family," engraved on a new photo album sitting like a trophy on the table. Inside, there were pages of Sloan's school formals and a professional portrait of Elaine and my father. The pictures of my mother were gone or recaptioned in a way that didn't say her name. I closed the album before I had to find out which was worse. By the time the engagement talk began, venues with chandeliers, a photographer who shot for the right magazines, I had already moved my hope into a safer bank. Not the trust, not money. The bank where I put my hours, my breath, my repetitions. The one that pays out in steadiness when other accounts run dry. So when Elaine called me that afternoon from her throne of hospitality to declare that my mother's legacy belonged to Sloane's wedding, she wasn't surprising me so much as declaring open what had been covert. An occupation becomes official when the flag comes down and another goes up. I noted the time, the date, the words. Then I folded my jacket sleeves to perfect 90-degree angles, polished a surface already shining, and slid the footlocker out for the binder I'd labeled months earlier. The lighthouse was gone from the wall in Charleston, but there was a geometry the marsh print couldn't touch. Order is its own light. 6 months before Elaine's triumphant phone call, the first probe had already reached me. It didn't come from her directly, but from a man who had never once wasted words. Arthur R. Haynes, my mother's estate attorney, sent an email with the subject line, "Heads up." The body was as lean as an operations order. Unusual inquiries into the trust. Source appears linked to Elaine. Recommend review. Arthur had managed my mother's affairs for decades. He wasn't sentimental, and he wasn't sloppy. If he flagged something, it wasn't a courtesy. It was reconnaissance. I requested leave and flew to Boston, where his office sat high above the harbor, all dark wood and quiet power. When he shook my hand, he didn't ask how I was coping. He said simply, "Specialist Owen, thank you for coming." He poured 2 fingers of amber scotch, my mother's preferred brand after a successful negotiation. That small gesture told me everything. This wasn't about comfort. It was about continuity, about honoring her strategy through mine. We got to work. His paralegal laid out a slim folder, tabbed and labeled. Every contact from Elaine's side was already logged. Phone calls to financial advisors, emails testing technicalities in the trust. It wasn't a frontal assault. It was reconnaissance by probing. She wanted to see where the walls cracked. I thought about artillery tactics. You fire for effect once you've bracketed the target. Elaine was bracketing. "Defense alone won't hold," I said. My voice wasn't angry. It was as flat as a firing table. Arthur leaned back, eyes sharp. Then we set the terrain ourselves. Give her false gaps, apparent vulnerabilities that will trip alarms. That became the plan. We shored up the trust with new legal fortifications, layers she couldn't easily penetrate. Then, deliberately, we left a handful of baited weaknesses, loopholes that looked careless but weren't. Any attempt to exploit them would trigger silent logs, IP addresses, recorded calls under one-party consent where the law allowed, and date-stamped exhibits. Every entry went into a catalog. At the top of each page, the format was strict. OP Knight Heron, EXHB3, phone inquiry, 1403. It looked less like a legal record and more like a chain of custody label. That was deliberate. Elaine lived on emotion, but paper trails don't care about feelings. Arthur's advice was simple. Don't engage, let her talk, let her probe, let her believe she's clever. She'll overextend, he said. She always does. I nodded. In the Army, we call it rules of engagement. Don't fire until you can see the target. Don't waste a round. Wait for the decisive shot. I flew back to Oklahoma with a binder in my rucksack. It was slim then, just a handful of logged calls, a few legal memos, a copy of my mother's original trust documents. But it was organized, tabbed, and labeled. On the spine, Operation Knight Heron. Back in my barracks, I slid it under the cot. Each time Elaine tried some new angle, a cousin calling to check in, a banker asking for clarification, it went into the binder. Not arguments, not emotions, just entries. I wasn't fighting her yet. I was collecting intelligence. The trigger conditions were clear in my mind. If Elaine ever made a public claim, if she ever dragged my mother's name into society pages or tried to present Sloane's wedding as funded by Elizabeth's legacy, that would be the decisive act of aggression. At that moment, OP Knight Heron would shift from defense to offense. Until then, I logged every move. My green notebook tracked times and phrases. The binder tracked evidence. I carried myself as I did on a range, waiting for the command to fire. Because battles aren't won by the first one who yells. They're won by the one who records, prepares, and then delivers the single shot that ends the fight. The decisive round didn't come as a lawsuit or a bank statement. It came wrapped in glossy paper and polite society words. One evening, my phone buzzed with a message from an old friend in Charleston. "Congrats on the family news." The question mark did the damage. He attached a link to the Post and Courier Society pages. I opened it, expecting a wedding announcement. What I found was a public execution of truth. The photograph was staged, lit perfectly. Sloane in a white dress beside her fiancé, his family name as heavy with banking money as hers was with borrowed grace. The article was the kind that fawned. Heritage, connections, plans for a lavish Nantucket ceremony. But the final paragraph stopped me cold. "We are just so grateful for the generous legacy left by my husband's late wife, Elizabeth," Elaine had told the reporter. "Her kindness has allowed the children to have such a wonderful start." I read the line twice, 3 times. Not a rumor, not a whisper at a gala. This was print, permanent and public. She had taken my mother's name, Elizabeth, and stapled it onto Sloane's wedding. She had claimed my mother's foresight as fuel for her daughter's fairy tale. In Charleston, people would nod and believe it. My mother had been rewritten into their narrative. I didn't rage. I didn't pace. I tapped the screen and saved the article as a PDF, time-stamped it, and printed a copy in the dayroom printer before evening chow. It slid into the binder under a new tab. OP Knight Heron, EXHG1, Charleston Society page. The trigger condition had been met. The operation was now live. That night, I initiated a secure video call with Arthur Haynes. His face appeared against his shelves of books and the reflection of harbor lights in the window. He didn't ask how I felt. He asked for a sitrep. "Unauthorized public claim made," I reported. Source, Charleston Post and Courier, dated Sunday. Quote, "Attributes trust legacy to stepmother, earmarked for stepsister's wedding. Public appropriation. Confirmation attached as Exhibit G1. Command intent, shift posture from defense to offense. Target, full exposure." Arthur nodded once. His expression didn't flicker, but his voice carried the weight of finality. "Then we prepare the dossier. You'll need to be present." "I'll be present," I said. Planning took on the rhythm of a field exercise. We set the objective. Confront Elaine and Sloane directly, with my father present, so there could be no denial or reframing. The method. Lay down evidence piece by piece, all cataloged, irrefutable. The end state. Their claims neutralized, my father forced to see in black and white what he had ignored for years. Logistics followed. Arthur would assemble the packet, email transcripts, phone call recordings under one-party consent statutes, IP logs showing Elaine's associates probing the trust, and a forensic handwriting analysis confirming forged signatures on minor amendments. Each tab would be color-coded. Green for transcripts, red for signature reports, blue for advisor emails. A clean chain of evidence. My part was simpler but heavier. I booked a one-way flight to Charleston for Saturday. I reserved a small hotel room downtown, neutral ground. Then I sent a message to my father. No greetings, no explanations, no openings for negotiation. Family meeting, house. Saturday, 1500 hours. Attendance mandatory. In my barracks closet hung my dress blues, pressed and sheathed in a garment bag. I removed them and laid them across the cot. The deep blue jacket with its brass buttons, the ribbons earned in Oklahoma's sun, the trousers creased to a knife's edge. To Elaine, they were cheap uniforms. To me, they were armor. They were credibility. I rehearsed nothing but posture. Parade rest. Feet shoulder width. Hands clasped at the small of my back. A stance drilled into me until it became second nature. Stillness, authority, readiness. I would not shout. I would not argue. I would stand and let the record speak. On the flight east, I pictured the operation like an artillery fire mission. The first exhibit would be the Charleston article. Registration fire, undeniable. The subsequent pieces would bracket the target closer. The transcripts, the emails, the forged signatures. The final round, the retirement account withdrawals, would be fire for effect. By the end, the room would not just hear, but feel the impact. H hour, 1500, Saturday. Location, my father's living room, now Elaine's throne room. Objective, collapse her occupation with paper, not with noise. That was the plan. And in the Army, a good plan executed now beats a perfect plan that never leaves the map. The Charleston house hadn't changed in its bones. The oyster shell driveway still crunched underfoot, the porch still loomed with its columns, and the chandelier still spilled warm light into the foyer. But the soul of the place had shifted years ago, colonized and redecorated into someone else's kingdom. At 14:58 hours, I stepped across the threshold. I didn't knock. My old key slid into the lock, and with the quiet click of tumblers, I entered as though reclaiming terrain that had always been mine. They were waiting in the living room. Elaine, perched upright on the sofa, Tiffany beside her in a white sundress, and my father slouched in his armchair. The air was thick with perfume and tension. Elaine smiled, but it was thin and delayed. "Rose?" she said, as though surprised. "We weren't expecting a performance?" Her eyes flicked over my uniform. The pressed blues, the brass buttons, the ribbons across my chest. A soldier had entered her parlor, and her smirk faltered. I didn't respond. I moved to the heavy oak coffee table in the center of the room, set down my briefcase, and opened it with a crisp metallic snap. I placed the recorder on the wood first, small, gray, and humming with proof. The sound of plastic meeting oak echoed louder than it should have. "On March 15th at 1400 hours, I said evenly, Elaine Owen placed a phone call to me. In it, she stated her intent to divert the Elizabeth Owen Trust to Tiffany Owen's upcoming wedding. This call was recorded legally under one-party consent." Elaine's face went pale. You can't—" "I can," I interrupted, still calm. And I did. From the briefcase, I drew the black binder, 3 inches thick, its white spine label reading O.P. Knight Heron, dossier. I slid it across the polished surface toward my father. The scrape of cardboard on wood was the sound of artillery rolling into position. "This," I continued, "is a complete record of 6 months of attempts to infiltrate and manipulate the trust. It includes phone transcripts, IP logs, advisor correspondence, and handwriting analysis on forged amendments. Every page is authenticated and indexed. Review it." My father stared at the binder as if it were a weapon, his knuckles whitening on the chair's armrest. His lips parted, but no words came. Elaine's composure cracked. She shot to her feet, her voice sharp and shrill. "This is absurd. Lies. Rose has always been jealous, twisting things, making up stories. Robert, don't you see? She's trying to destroy this family." I didn't flinch. Parade rest, feet planted, eyes forward. My presence was steady as stone. My father opened the cover. Silence fell except for the rustle of pages. His eyes moved over transcripts, over emails. I watched his face change. First confusion, then disbelief, then the slow, dreadful recognition of truth. Tiffany began to cry, a thin, rehearsed sound. "Daddy, I don't understand. What's happening?" Elaine lunged for the binder, but my father's hand slammed down on it. For the first time in over a decade, he raised his voice. "Sit down, Elaine." She froze. I waited. Discipline meant letting the evidence detonate on its own. Finally, my father looked up at me. His face was bloodless, his voice a whisper. Is this real?" "It's all there," I said. "Every word, every document. Your choice is whether you keep looking away." Elaine broke then, not with dignity, but with fury. She forged it. She staged this entire thing. She's dangerous, Robert, can't you see? Her voice rose higher, desperate, cornered. But my father wasn't looking at her anymore. His eyes stayed on me. Years of denial were collapsing inside him, the weight visible in his shoulders. The flip was complete. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. This wasn't victory. This was exposure. Protocol executed, objective secured. Now came the final round. The discrepancy Elaine didn't know I had saved for last. The living room was no longer Elaine's stage. The walls that once displayed her curated portraits seemed to lean in now, silent witnesses to a tribunal. The dossier sat open on my father's lap. Page after page of her deceit laid bare in black ink and signatures. But I wasn't finished. I reached into the briefcase one final time and withdrew a sealed envelope, thick with notarized reports. I placed it on top of the open binder and slid it forward. The movement was deliberate, like chambering around. "This is the last exhibit," I said evenly. "Not about the trust fund. About your retirement accounts, Dad." He blinked, confusion flickering across his face. Elaine stiffened, her hands clenching the fabric of her dress. "For 5 years," I continued, "unauthorized withdrawals have been made under your name. Slow, systematic transfers, disguised as routine expenses. The forensic trail points to one person." I let the silence hang. Her. Elaine's face drained of color. "That's ridiculous," she spat. "Robert, you can't possibly believe—" But my father was already tearing open the envelope. His hands trembled as he read through the statements, the bank authorizations, the signature analysis. Each page was another artillery shell, pounding away at 12 years of illusion. He looked up, his eyes glassy but burning with something I hadn't seen since childhood. Clarity. "Elaine," he said slowly, voice hoarse, "you stole from me." She lurched forward, desperate now, her words a flood. "Robert, please, listen. It was for us. For Tiffany, for the family." "The family?" His voice cracked like a rifle shot. He slammed the binder shut, the sound sharp and final. "This family was gone the day I let you through that door." Tiffany sobbed harder, clinging to his sleeve. "Daddy, I didn't know. I swear I didn't—" He pulled his arm free. His gaze never left Elaine. "Get out," he said. Elaine froze, her mouth hanging open. For a moment she tried one last maneuver, her voice dripping venom. "You'll regret this. You'll lose everything without me." But my father's face was carved from stone. "The only thing I regret," he whispered, "is letting you erase her." He pointed toward the empty wall where my mother's portrait had once hung. That was the end. Elaine collapsed back into her chair, the fight drained out of her. Tiffany's sobs quieted into hiccups. The silence that followed was thick, absolute, a silence that swallowed every pretense they had built. I remained at parade rest, steady, impassive. My work was complete. The evidence had spoken. The institution of truth had rendered its judgment. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about protocol. About restoring order after 12 years of corruption. My father sat there, binder in his lap, eyes hollowed by the weight of what he had seen. "God, Rose," he whispered, almost to himself. "What have I done?" I didn't answer. Some questions weren't mine to solve. The house, once Elaine's kingdom, now felt like a ruin. And in that ruin, the chain of command had shifted. The house was quiet after their departure. Suitcases dragged across the hardwood, the slam of the front door, and the fading sound of tires on the oyster shell drive were the last echoes of Elaine's reign. My father sat in his armchair, hands resting heavy on the binder as if it were both burden and salvation. For years, he had lived inside her version of reality. Tonight, it collapsed in one sitting. The price of that collapse was written all over his face. Lines of exhaustion, regret carved deep. "Rose," he said finally, his voice low, broken. "I'm sorry. I should have protected you. I should have protected her. I stood at parade rest, steady, uniform still sharp in the lamplight. I didn't gloat. I didn't forgive. Some wounds take years to heal, and some never do, but the chain of command had been restored. Order had returned. Dad, I said calmly, the truth was always here. You just had to look at it. He nodded, eyes wet, unable to meet mine for long. The silence between us was heavy but clean. No more illusions, no more shadows. I left the house that night without looking back. The air outside was crisp, the sky above Charleston dark and endless. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. My mother's memory was safe. The trust she built, financial and spiritual, was defended. This wasn't victory in the cinematic sense. There were no cheers, no triumphant speeches. Only the quiet dignity of protocol followed and mission complete. And that's what people forget. Sometimes strength isn't in the roar, it's in the silence. In standing still when everyone wants you broken. In letting the evidence speak when rage begs you to shout. Elaine underestimated me. She thought uniform meant weakness, meant desperation. She thought silence meant surrender. But silence, when it's disciplined, is power. Quiet doesn't mean weak. Dignity doesn't expire. And respect, whether in a barracks, a boardroom, or a family home, must be given first, not earned through humiliation. Have you ever seen someone underestimated until the truth came out? Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story spoke to you, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a story. We post new ones every single day.